Rachel had always loved collecting antiques. There was something fascinating about objects that had lived through centuries, each carrying its own untold stories. One crisp Saturday morning, while browsing a quaint antique store tucked away in a forgotten corner of town, she came across an old, ornate mirror. Its frame was beautiful, carved out of dark wood with intricate swirling patterns that seemed to shift ever so slightly when she looked at them. The store owner hesitated when Rachel showed interest in the mirror. "That one's old," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Belonged to a wealthy family. Strange things were said about it." He paused. "Are you sure you want it?" Rachel, always one for adventure, brushed off his warning with a smile. She thought the mirror would look perfect in her living room. She bought it, unaware that her life was about to change forever. That evening, she placed the mirror above her fireplace. The dark wood frame contrasted beautifully with the light-colored walls, and it became the centerpiece of the room. Rachel admired her reflection for a moment, then shrugged off the strange feeling that crept up her spine as night began to fall. Later that night, Rachel sat alone on the couch, reading a book. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock and the occasional creak of the wooden floors. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something strange in the mirror. A flicker, just for a second. She glanced up, but there was nothing. Her reflection stared back at her, the room behind her empty. Rachel chuckled nervously, convincing herself that it was just her imagination. But a sinking feeling settled in her chest, one she couldn't shake. As the hours ticked by, the house seemed to grow colder. The silence became heavier, more oppressive. Suddenly, a movement in the mirror caught her eye again. This time, it was unmistakable. A shadowy figure moving behind her reflection. Her heart pounded in her chest as she whipped around, only to find the room empty. Fear clutched at her. She slowly turned back to the mirror. The shadow was still there, just behind her reflection. Tall, dark, its features indistinct but looming. It seemed to shift closer. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she stepped back, away from the mirror, but the figure stayed, never moving beyond the glass. Is someone there?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to multiply. More shadows emerged in the mirror, each one creeping closer to her reflection, though the room behind her remained empty. Her heart raced, her legs rooted to the spot as she watched in horror. Suddenly, a knock came at her door. Rachel jumped, her eyes tearing away from the mirror. The knocking continued, loud, insistent. With shaking hands, she ran to the door and opened it. It was her friend, Laura.
"Rachel, are you okay? You sounded weird when I called earlier."
Rachel tried to gather herself, forcing a smile.
"Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little tired."
She didn't mention the mirror or the shadows. Laura stepped inside, glancing around.
"You've redecorated," she said, her eyes landing on the mirror. "Wow, that's eerie."
Before Rachel could respond, Laura approached the mirror, staring into it with a curious expression.
"Do you see that?"
she asked, tilting her head. Rachel's stomach dropped. "See what?" Laura pointed at the mirror, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's something moving behind us." Rachel's blood ran cold. She turned slowly towards the mirror, praying it was just her friend's imagination. But no, the shadows were back, closer, clearer now, and this time their faces were visible. Hollow black eyes stared out at them, their mouths open in silent screams. Laura gasped, backing away from the mirror.
"What is that?"
"I don't know. They've been there since I brought it home."
Suddenly, the room felt suffocating. The air thickened, the shadows in the mirror pressing against the glass, almost as if they were trying to break through. Rachel grabbed Laura's arm.
"We need to get out of here."
But just as they turned to leave, the glass cracked. A thin line ran down the center of the mirror, and a low, groaning sound filled the room, as though the shadows were straining to escape. Panicked, Rachel and Laura ran toward the door. Just as they reached it, The mirror shattered. Glass flew across the room, and with it, the shadows poured out, tall, dark figures now free from their prison. They didn't move toward the women. Instead, they filled the room, twisting and turning in a slow, eerie dance. One by one, they began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air until the room was silent once again. Rachel and Laura stood frozen in shock, staring at the empty wall where the mirror had once been. The next morning, Rachel returned to the antique shop. She slammed the remains of the mirror's frame onto the counter.
What did you sell me?
She demanded, her voice shaking. The shopkeeper sighed, his eyes sad. I told you it was cursed. It's been passed down for generations. No one knows where the shadows came from, but once they're free, they're gone. You've broken the curse. Rachel's hands trembled. And what happens now? The shopkeeper's eyes met hers. Now, you hope they never come back?